fertilizer market then is a global market. And so supply shocks then in any part of the world then translate into higher prices then for nitrogen fertilizer all over the world. Dave Abler, I'm the head of the Department of Agricultural Economics, Sociology, and Education at Penn State. So the conflict in Iran then is having a significant effect then on shipments that are going through the Strait of Hormuz and through the Gulf region generally. And many of those shipments are shipments of fertilizer or natural gas, nitrogen-based fertilizer. Now, the countries then that are exposed then to the current conflict account for about half then of global exports of urea, which is a nitrogen-based fertilizer and the most commonly used then form of nitrogen fertilizer by U.S. farmers. And so as the conflict then affects the shipments of fertilizer then to other countries, or shipments of natural gas then which other countries such as Trinidad and Tobago, which as it turns out is a large supplier of fertilizer to the United States, it then is pushing up the prices then and reducing the availability then of nitrogen fertilizers for farmers in this country. I think we're seeing an immediate rise then in the prices then of some crops that are used widely to feed livestock, so corn and soybeans in particular. Corn and soybeans account for about half then of all the planted crop acreage in the United States. And the price then of soybeans is up, I think, over 10% since the start of the year. The price of corn has not gone up that much. I think it's only up about 3%. But if you look at futures markets and what they're expecting then to happen later on in this year, you're seeing then rises in futures prices toward the end of this year of over 10% then for corn. If we look at the effects then of the conflict on prices then of livestock products, two of the products that are important to Pennsylvania in that regard, as well as to the Mid-Atlantic and really much of the eastern United States, are dairy and poultry. And if we look at dairy then, about half of the costs then, production costs for dairy in the eastern United States then are feed, purchased feed. And that feed then is predominantly corn and soybeans. And that corn and soybeans, the corn in particular then, heavily dependent upon nitrogen fertilizer in order to grow. And if we look at layers, those are the chickens then which lay eggs that we consume. Purchased feed accounts for about 60% then of total production costs then for layers. And again, that feed then, a large part of it then is corn and other crops then that depend upon nitrogen fertilizer in order to grow. And so as the price of nitrogen fertilizer rises and the price of corn and other feed crops increases, that then in turn will mean higher prices for eggs. So in terms of the bottom line then for households, households spend about 10% of their income on average on food. And that includes the food that they buy at the grocery stores and other places, as well as the food that they consume when they're dining out. And so, that part of their budget then is going to face a stress test, at least in the short term. So farms themselves have some strategies then for adjusting then to these higher prices then for nitrogen fertilizer. One strategy then is to shift to legumes such as soybeans. And so I think we can expect to see perhaps 1 million or 1.5 million acres of land that would have gone into corn this year being shifted over to soybeans then as a result. Again, soybeans being a legume are able to draw their nitrogen from the air, so they don't need nitrogen fertilizer. So that's one important thing that we can expect to see. I think we can also expect to see farms then attempt to economize then on their other expenses in order to offset then the higher prices for nitrogen fertilizers, for crop farms, and for purchased livestock feed then for livestock products such as dairy and eggs.